Steelers have found a hidden gem on their roster as they look to find their next wide receiver number two. My name is Peyton Kleppe, and on today's episode of Steelers Digest, we'll be breaking down the latest Pittsburgh Steelers analysis and reports regarding the Pittsburgh Steelers football team. As Pittsburgh Steelers search for their next star wide receiver, they could have already found their answer that is already on their roster. Before we get into the latest news about the Pittsburgh Steelers, if you guys are not already currently subscribed to the channel, click that subscribe button down below. Only 9% of our current viewers are actually currently subscribed. So if you click that subscribe button, we will get you guys the latest Pittsburgh Steelers news every single day. Let's get right into it, as the Pittsburgh Steelers have probably already found their next great wide receiver on their roster. So as the Pittsburgh Steelers have had a great history in drafting wide receivers, the latest guy who has been drafted to the Pittsburgh Steelers at that wide receiver position was Roman Wilson. Roman Wilson was a third-round pick that the Pittsburgh Steelers did indeed select in the third round last year, and we did have a lot of high hopes for this guy, but unfortunately he did get hurt and was injured throughout the majority of the season. I think the only game he did actually see some game action was against the Los Angeles Chargers, which was, I believe, like week 5 or 6 last year. So that was the only game this guy actually did suit up for. Other than that, he did not see any action on the field, didn't really receive any catches or anything like that. So it was kind of frustrating to see, especially we did have Hard Knocks last year, and this guy was on the Hard Knocks. You did see him, but he was never really on the game at all. He was never playing. And, Coach Tomlin at the end of the year just kind of kicked this guy to the curb. He really mentioned that he really was not ready for the NFL yet. And, barring some injuries, it does happen to rookies here and there. There was a guy a few years ago, definitely actually more than a few, probably around 10 years ago, that we did pick in the second round. Never really saw any action. His career was riddled with injury, but this guy was Senquez Goldston. He was cornerback that the Pittsburgh Steelers did have high hopes for. I don't want to compare this guy to Senquez Goldston because that could probably be the floor for Roman Wilson. Roman Wilson was a guy coming out of Michigan. He was a speedster, but he also could make some aggressive catches and be a playmaker down the field. He was great in the route running department, and he was great at everything else. Sure catcher. And he was coming out of that Michigan team that had a ton of dogs like Aiden Hutchinson and, some of those other guys that came out of that Jim Harbaugh era in Michigan. But, Roman Wilson could also have a pretty high upside. If you look back in a few recent years, Calvin Austin was a guy that we took, actually lasted 3 from that 2022 NFL draft, where we did select Kenny Pickett, George Pickens, and Calvin Austin III. Obviously, the only guy remaining from those 3 guys is Calvin Austin III. And Calvin Austin did have some similar troubles to Roman Wilson. Roman Wilson was a guy that coming out of college had a lot of eyes on him. Calvin Austin was the same. Calvin Austin came from Memphis. A lot of guys did want him. The Ravens were a team that were rumored to get Calvin Austin if the Pittsburgh Steelers did not select him that year. But, Calvin Austin also did face a lot of issues his first couple years coming into the NFL. He was injured for most of his rookie year and did not see any on-the-field action. And, coming into his second year, he started to get some more game reps. A notable play I remember him making was that preseason game against the Atlanta Falcons. He took back a kick return for pretty significant amount of yardages, and Coach Tomlin goes up to him after the play and gives him a big old hug. And that just made me feel great about the Pittsburgh Steelers organization. Just that player-to-coach bond between the two. Coach Tomlin was just so happy to see a guy like Calvin Austin finally make a big play after overcoming a ton of hardship since coming into the NFL. And I think Roman Wilson is a guy that could have a breakout year in his second year in the NFL. Obviously, coming into the league, you're going to be faced with a lot of different positions, a lot of different viewpoints from coaches, other players who are competing against you. But, at the end of the day, we do want to see these guys thrive in the NFL, and the coaches do as well. So, I do expect Coach Tomlin and Arthur Smith to put, a lot of pressure on Roman, but good pressure, because this is a wide receiver room that has a lot to prove. We have a lot of guys in there that aren't really big name guys, but, can just show on the field who they are as men, as players. Like I said earlier, Calvin Austin is a guy that has a lot to prove, and I do think coming into his third or fourth year, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Going into his third or fourth year, he's got a lot to prove, and I do think Calvin Austin can be a dog in that slot and maybe rack up a quick 1,000-yard season. We will have a dog on the other side of the field at the wide receiver position in DK Metcalf. This guy is a proven guy that, in Seattle, he proved year in, year out he is and could be a potentially top 10 receiver in the NFL. I love DK Metcalf. I've liked this guy since he came out of college, out of Ole Miss, and I think he's going to help guys like Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin have breakout years, because these defenses are going to be dialing in on DK Metcalf. He's really our only offensive guy that on paper is a dog. Some of these other guys, don't get me wrong. Pat Freiermuth, dog. Jaylen Warren, dog. But, the only guy that has proven himself year in, year out these past couple years in the league has been DK Metcalf. So it's really going to open up opportunities and doors for guys like Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin, because they're going to get that one-on-one coverage, and they're going to be able to show who they are as playmakers and, make those big plays. And I think, like I said earlier, Roman Wilson is a guy that coming out of the draft, he had a ton of speed, a ton of upside, and was he was supposed to be our Deontay Johnson after Deontay left. That short kind of route runner guy that can make those contested catches, but also make those big plays down the field and really just do it all. He's not a big guy, but he's a shifty and short guy. And sometimes those are the better guys. You look back in the NFL, you look at guys like Julian Edelman. That guy is a Super Bowl MVP. In that Super Bowl against the LA Rams, I believe it was, that dude had a ton of great catches that, guys like Julio Jones, these big physical receivers probably couldn't even make. Julian Edelman, underrated dog, and I think Roman Wilson, I'm not comparing him to Julian Edelman, but he could become a guy on our offense that just makes those contested plays, make those big plays over the middle that will be there because, after trading George Pickens, we do have a hole at that wide receiver number 2 position on our offense, and I do believe that the Pittsburgh Steelers will probably use Calvin Austin in that slot position. So, that wide receiver 2 position is really up for grabs, and I think Roman Wilson, if all goes well, will slide in at that wide receiver 2 position. Other than him on our roster, we did re-sign guys like Scotty Miller, who can make big plays here and there, but he's more of a depth piece, more of a special teams guy. And another guy we did sign was Ben Skronik, definitely a lunch pail guy, hard hat guy, Mr. Fundamental type guy, but he is more of a special teams kind of guy. He will make plays on special teams like he did last year, but he also will come in here and there, probably 3 or 4 plays on offense and make some catches. And we also did bring in Robert Woods, who could show guys like Roman Wilson what it's like to succeed. Robert Woods had a ton of success coming into the league out of USC, came into Buffalo, had success, went to Los Angeles Rams, had a ton of success, also won a Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams. And, after the Rams, he did go to Houston, have a few years with C.J. Stroud, help that young quarterback out, and I do think he will help guys like Roman Wilson out. So that is all I have for you guys tonight on Steelers Digest. If you guys aren't currently subscribed, click that subscribe button down below. Here we go, Steelers. Peace out, boys.